Yeah, I'd like to make welcome the Wurundjeri and Wurrung community of this area, and we acknowledge your presence. Thank you.
Waminjeka, welcome. Firstly, let me acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and all of them from the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present tonight. My name is Monique Ryan, and I'm the independent member for the federal seat of Kooyong. And I'd like to acknowledge my other guests this evening. Firstly, Uncle Bart, thank you so much for that introduction. Bart Willoughby is an Indigenous Australian musician of the Pinchinjara and Mirning descent. The whale is his totem. He began his musical career with a band that many of us have listened to over the years, No Fixed Address, and more recently has played with Coloured Stone and Yothu Yindu. And I think he did a beautiful job with that introduction. Thanks, Bart. My other two very special guests this evening, and I think we're really lucky to be hosting them in Kooyong today, Thomas Mayo. Thomas is a Torres Strait Islander man who was born on Larrakia country in Darwin, and he remains a proud Darwinite. As an islander growing up on the mainland, he learned to hunt traditional foods with his father and to island dance with the Darwin community of Torres Strait Islanders. In high school, his English teacher suggested that he should be a writer, but first he became a wharf labourer and then a union official for the Maritime Union of Australia. He found his voice on the wharves, and as he gained the skills of negotiation and organisation in the union movement, Thomas has applied those to advancing the rights of Indigenous people. He was a signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and he's become a tireless campaigner for the voice. Following the Uluru Convention, Thomas carried the sacred canvas of the Uluru Statement from the Heart on an 18-month journey around this country. He's written a couple of beautiful books about the Uluru Statement and about the voice. I recommend them to you as highly as I can. And he's going to be joining us today to speak from the perspective of someone from the north of this country. And we have Marcus Stewart. Marcus is a First Nations individual from Victoria. He began his career in the child protection system, as in the out-of-home care system and as a child and family therapist, but then became a member of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria and has taken the reserve seat for the Tongarang Land and Waters Council, then became co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly alongside Auntie Geraldine Atkinson, and has worked to support and empower First Peoples through the calls for and the negotiations for the Victorian Treaty. So he has really important lived experience of treaty negotiations. Prior to his election into the Assembly, he was part of the Federation of Victorian Traditional Owner Corporations and was able in that role to secure key initiatives and funding for traditional owner groups to support Aboriginal water, cultural, fire and treaty readiness from the Victorian Government. He's a seasonal and skilled negotiator and strategist, and he's also been working very, very hard in recent months on The Voice. What we're going to do this evening is I'm just going to speak for about 10 minutes on why I think The Voice is important. Thomas and Marcus are going to do the same, and then we're going to have time for a question and answer session as well, and then talk about the plan for Kooyong. I spoke about 4 weeks ago in Parliament House about why I support The Voice, and much of what I say tonight reflects what I said then. So I've got the speech that I gave in February, but I've changed it a little bit, and I might just give that to you now. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands. For 65,000 years before white people came, migrants came, they possessed this land under their own laws and customs. Their sovereignty has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists now with the sovereignty of the Crown. In the Uluru Statement for the Heart, the First Nations people of this country asked us to create for them a voice to this Parliament, to our Parliament. The three aspirations of those individuals who signed the Uluru Statement from the Heart were the right to be consulted about decisions which affect them, a right to truth-telling, and a right to treaties. Those requests are not statements of blame, and they're not demands for a response of guilt. They are requests for reconciliation. They are requests for constructive engagement with that part of our national community which has been most excluded from the very early days of European settlement of Australia, from the mainstream activities and achievements of much of this nation. The Uluru Statement is a beautiful document. Thomas is going to recite it for us a little bit later. It is an invitation and it's a gift to the settlers of this country from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Most Australians haven't yet read the Uluru Statement. In the next few months, my team will provide every home in Kooyong with a copy of the Uluru Statement. We're also offering all of you a copy of the Constitution. There's some at the front door. People always laugh when I mention the Constitution. It's actually a really good read. This probably says a bit about me, but anyway. So the concept of The Voice is not new. For more than 30 years, all sides of politics in Australia have accepted the need for a credible Indigenous voice to the federal government and for constitutional reforms to empower our Indigenous people to take a rightful place in their own country. The need for constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders has been supported by every Prime Minister since John Howard in 2007. Recognition is just a simple statement of fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the first people here. A voice to Parliament is a simple and a practical way to achieve that through the Australian Constitution. Most people, I think, don't really get what a voice to Parliament is or how it will work, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But what our Prime Minister has suggested, the piece of legislation that will be before the Parliament in the next few months, is pretty simple. It's a new provision to be added to the Constitution which has 3 sentences, and they are: there shall be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. When we say a body, it's just a group of people. It's a committee. There are many committees in Australia. Very few of them are to be frightened of. It's a few. Second sentence. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to Parliament and the Executive Government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So this group of people who will be representing this community can talk to Parliament about the things that they care about. Again, not a particularly frightening concept. The Parliament shall, subject to the Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. So basically, Parliament can shape, define and determine the activities of the voice. So Parliament has essentially all significant powers over many significant powers over the voice. It's a pretty simple concept. It's simple, but it's powerful. All the voice will be is a body of Indigenous people with the rights and the means to be formally consulted on policy and legislation which affects them and their communities. Essentially, those representative Indigenous Australians will know that their communities are able to speak directly to parliamentarians in Canberra. They will be able to offer practical and effective solutions to their unique challenges: jobs, health, education and justice. The voice will be purely advisory in its construct and in its effect. It will not have the powers of veto over legislation. Lots of people say, well, why don't we just establish one? Why do we have to have a referendum? Why do we have to change the Constitution? And the reality is you could establish a voice without a constitutional amendment. We know this because it's been attempted on many occasions in the past. We've had the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee, the National Aboriginal Conference, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, the National Indigenous Council, the National Congress of Australia's First People, and the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council. All of those bodies were temporary or poorly designed or underfunded, and all of them have ultimately been abolished. We have learned from those experiences. We need to cement recognition into the fabric of our governance, and the only way to do that is by constitutional reform, by a referendum. This constitutional model, which is coming to us, results from extensive dialogue in Indigenous communities around the country. The existence of the voice, but not its form, will be entrenched into our Constitution, but not the details. And there's a pretty constant call for details, but the details of the voice will not, should not, be determined by referendum. They should, and they will, be delineated by our Parliament. And that's because they need to be mutable. They need to be able to change over time as we need them to change. They don't need to be in the Constitution. They shouldn't be in the Constitution. We need our voice to be able to change and mature as we as a country change and mature. We're not going to get it right the first time. I can tell you, Parliament gets very things right the first time. We need our voice to be adaptable and flexible as we as a country are adaptable and flexible. We also need to remember that there is no one Aboriginal nation. There are many distinct Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups. Each of them has their own culture, language, beliefs and practices. We're talking about more than 250 languages with 800 dialects. It's not going to be an easy thing to establish a voice that will adequately and properly represent all of those peoples. To give those many nations a collective voice will take nuance and negotiation from all parties, but that process has to be predicated on respect and understanding. We all know that referenda in this country rarely succeed. We all know that the discussion of this issue has at times in this country already been difficult and distressing. I hope that that can change. We need to be able to discuss this really important issue respectfully. We need to have no name calling. We need to be sympathetic to the views of people who vote no. We need to, if we don't do that, then we won't have the conversations that we as a country need to have. We need to think about what will happen if we don't vote yes at the end of this year. and how we will feel about ourselves as a country and how other countries will look at us, if that is the case. Australians are fair and generous people. I know that the people of Kooyong are fair and generous people. In 1897, Mark Twain said, "Australian history does not read like history, but like the most beautiful lies." My feeling is that it's time for us all to tell the truth. It's only fair that our 122-year-old constitution recognises Indigenous peoples as the first people of Australia. In 1967, they were counted. In 2017, with the Uluru Statement of the Heart, they sought to be heard. But they're still waiting. This is a chance to unite our nation. It's a healing gesture. It is a chance to right wrongs by writing yes. This is for us as a nation, I think, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I think a successful referendum will be a source of pride for the Australians, and it will be the start of something. It won't be the be-all and the end-all. It won't be a moment for triumphalism, but it will be a unifying moment for all of us. And so, as the Uluru Statement says, I think it's time to leave base camp and to trek across this vast country, to walk together with Indigenous Australians as we walk together with those born from early settlers and from our more recent immigrants. It's time for us to give our First Nations a voice, and it's time for us to listen to that voice. Thank you.
Kapukubil, Murabuai, it means good evening, my people, in my language, Kalalagaoya. I am a Karareg Aboriginal man. Karareg Nation is the islands closest to the mainland in the Torres Strait that identify as Aboriginal, which includes Thursday Island. A lot of you would know of Thursday Island. That's where my father was born. Kakagal and Erabumle, Central Island groups, and Erub is an island near Mer, or Murray Island, another one you would have heard about. And Murabuai, I say that, my people, because I believe that you are here to listen, and I believe that you are here because you believe that it is time for change in this country, to finally recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and set us on the course to righting the wrongs of the past. I want to thank Monique for the invitation to speak here and acknowledge Marcus and the great work that you do, brother. Monique, you really did succinctly cover everything, so I mean it's really great. Monique is a person that obviously listens carefully and has, like you, taken the time to consider the past and what the Uluru Statement is ultimately proposing. And she's obviously read a very good book, as she mentioned, Finding the Heart of the Nation. All of the author royalties go to the campaign, so that's not a plug for myself. But no, these things are important. We need to inform ourselves because there's a lot of Australians that aren't here with us tonight, even just from Kooyong and the surrounds, that need to hear from people that they trust, from people that look like them, about the importance of this and why they should vote yes. I'm going to share with you, I don't want to take up too much time because I'd love for some Q&A. I'm sure you've got some burning questions about how you can help and some things you might have heard from others that you want clarified or you want to understand better so you can take the answers back to them. And I'm conscious that many of you have heard me speak 3 or 4 times, or some of you have. I acknowledge my good friends here, Tui and Jim, comrades from the union movement, the MUA, which is where I found my voice. I was a quiet fellow to begin with. But things like the 1998 Patrick's dispute help you learn to find your voice. And working with people twice your age that were prepared to give up everything that we'd fought for following the dispute certainly helped me find my voice. I can't stand injustices, and I think that's why I've ended up standing here before you. But my experience that I really want to share with you, that some of you have heard, is the contemporary road to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And I want to stress just how much hard work has gone into this campaign. Okay, not just since the 12 months or the 24 months leading to the making of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but many, many decades of struggle, many, many decades of heartbreak, of the experience of broken promises, of programs that worked, or voices that have been established that have been destroyed by subsequent governments. This is an absolutely vital thing to consider as we go to this referendum, that the voice is something that is logical, it's strategic in how we can close the gap, it's the right thing to do, and it is the key to hearing Indigenous people genuinely, not just who is the loudest amongst our people or who the politicians choose on any particular day to speak for us, but people that we choose and that we can hold to account and that we can see what they're saying on our behalf. This is the key to moving forward in this country and closing the gap. The dialogues that led to Uluru considered the lessons that had been learnt throughout those decades of struggle. It had considered that voices had been established many times before, and any time they made the Parliament uncomfortable, they've been silenced. We considered that every statement and petition that comes before the Uluru Statement has been dismissed or ignored. Slightly different was the Barunga Statement, 1988. Bob Hawke listened to Aboriginal people in Barunga, a small community, Aboriginal community near Katherine in the Northern Territory, and he promised a couple of things, but he wasn't able to deliver, and it wasn't able to last through the political cycle. The two things, so he promised a national treaty, failed, but he promised a voice, and that was the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission. Now, I mentioned I was a wharfie. When I was a young wharfie, I remember how we were demonised, how the Australian people were softened up before they dragged us from our livelihoods in the middle of the night. They failed with our union, the Voice for Maritime Workers. But Howard did the same thing to ATSIC. Now, people of those times that were around during Howard, of a certain generation, would think that ATSIC was corrupt and that it failed. And I've heard throughout this campaign, especially recently, people saying that setting up Indigenous representative bodies has failed before. That's because we never had a chance. It's not that our people failed. And I'm not saying that we didn't have problems. It's the governments that failed. It's the governments like Howard's that demonised our leaders, that didn't give us the time to deal with those problems, that amplified the issues, and then as soon as it softened up the Australian public, ATSIC was destroyed. The Minister of the time, Amanda Vanstone, has admitted in more recent times that it was the wrong thing to do. Because we also learnt when we made the Uluru Statement that without a voice, we go backwards. We're degraded, we're exploited, we're easily divided. We saw the Northern Territory intervention soon after the destruction of ATSIC. We saw hundreds of millions of dollars cut from frontline services in our communities, leading to the WA government announcing that they were going to shut down communities, if you remember that. In 2015, national actions to try and stop it from happening. We've seen death in custody after death in custody. We've seen royal commissions with recommendations not implemented. We've seen money meant for Indigenous benefit given to non-Indigenous organisations that have used those funds that could have helped our people in our communities to fight against land rights. These are the things that happen when you don't have a voice. The lessons in the Uluru Statement give it great power, but also the consensus that was reached. Those dialogues that happened all around the country, that were well informed, They were formulated to ensure that a cross-section of our perspectives and views as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from around the country were heard in a safe place. And they came together at Uluru in that one final collective set of proposals: voice, treaty, truth. Now, our priority is the voice, for all the reasons that I said. But as Marcus might mention, it's also important to treaty making. There's a couple of things that this country is an outlier in for like nations. I think most people have heard that Australia is one of the only like nations that doesn't have a treaty with Indigenous peoples. Have you heard of that? Yeah? Did you hear Linda Burney during the election campaign? She said, it was fact-checked, that for like nations, Australia is also an outlier in that we don't have constitutional recognition of Indigenous peoples. They are both things that we are behind on in this world. So these are things that we must achieve. It's about our identity as Australians, about who we are in this world, about our standing. It's about our genuineness when it comes to believing in a fair go. And so when all that came together in the Uluru Statement from the Heart on the third morning, it was a political feat that this country should celebrate forever. The point that I was making was about the hard work. We had to suspend our disbelief that we could make change in this country, that Australians could agree with something that we proposed. Suspend our disbelief and look to the future with hope. When the final words of the Uluru Statement from the Heart were read, the entire room stood as one with standing acclamation. And I saw people that had been in passionate debate against each other, embracing each other with tears of joy and hope. That is something that we should celebrate. We had to believe. We also had to put ourselves through that torment of speaking the truth amongst ourselves, of having debate amongst ourselves, of having our disagreements, to reach that agreement about the Uluru Statement that brings us to this moment now. The other piece of hard work that we did was that we refused to take no for an answer. All those statements and petitions ignored, we wrote the Uluru Statement to you, the Australian people. And when Malcolm Turnbull, too soon after the Uluru Statement was made, in the most disrespectful way, dismissed our calls for a voice, we travelled the country, not just me with the Uluru Statement, but a lot of our people. And a lot of you in this room, actually, a lot of you are familiar from over the last few years. We didn't take no for an answer, and we fought, and we built a people's movement, and here we are today when a referendum is imminent. I read this article by Tony McAvoy, the first Indigenous silk. And just before I conclude, I just want to read what he said about what a voice would do. He sort of ran through this history of things and the things that we need for our people now. He said, when the former Commonwealth Attorney General sought an expedited appeal to overturn the decision in Love and Thomas, a national body was needed. He said, when the former Attorney General mainstreamed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal service funding, notwithstanding a report he commissioned recommending otherwise, a national body was needed. With the Council of Attorney General, when the Council of Attorney General considered whether there should be a nationally consistent approach to raising the minimum age of criminal responsibility, a national body was needed. When Federal Parliament passed laws establishing a Stolen Generations reparation scheme for the Northern Territory, a national body was needed. Now, the Federal Government is considering reform of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act, and a national body is needed. When the Native Title Act is next amended, and I'll mention here Howard bastardised that too, and made it very divisive in our communities. We need a national body. You can see in what McAvoy is saying there, that a voice is going to be vital to so many of the reforms that our people need and to so many of the things that we need to repair, policies and laws that have been made without our people. That you can only conclude are failing because the gap has continued to widen. I'll conclude with the great need for you to take action. This is urgent. It is urgent. We have only a few months until a referendum is going to be held. And I want to thank Monique again for taking leadership in this community here. And I want to thank all of you for coming along. And I hope you work as hard as we did to give you this opportunity. Thank you.
I'm glad that was a long clap. I always forgot the password to my iPad, but so I should say thank you and wawagi Kooyong. Thanks, Thomas. I want to acknowledge the hard work you've done, and also thanks, Monique, for inviting me along and championing such a significant cause to reshape the cultural tapestry of our great nation. So thank you, and how about another round of applause? I too want to extend my acknowledgement of country, that we're on the country of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and pay respects to their elders past and present. And in my language, that is Wawagi Woiwurrung, Luwiknugugangaguk, Wawagi Yumagu, Ngurubuk Nungodjan. So I acknowledge their people, their elders, their country, and what an amazing place, an amazing piece of country it is. I was interested to hear, Monique, about the Constitution being a good read. I do know it's only 29 documents, but I probably would have described it myself as a quick read, given it's a document of principles, not details, but I might get into that a little later. But my name's Marcus Stewart. I'm a proud Nirayal and Bullock man of the Tanarung Nation, Central Victoria. My country is the northern neighbour of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, taking all the high country from the Ovens, west of the Ovens and east of the I've just had the Camp Aspie. I nearly had a brain fade. I shouldn't forget that, should I? I also want to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and will never be ceded. I want to acknowledge other Aboriginal people in the room who might be here tonight. But ultimately, my talk tonight is addressed at our allies and the people of Kooyong, because once again, we find ourselves at your mercy throughout this referendum. We're a strong people, but in this nation, we don't have a political agency to make decisions that affect our lives. We need to watch other people decide whether our rights should be respected and our voices heard. So just think about that for a minute. Popular votes don't always make for good, dignified process, but here we are. Fortunately, the prize is absolutely worth fighting for, and that's a constitutionally enshrined voice for First Nations people. To finally have our place at the table of Australia's modern democracy, to have our voice heard and our traditions respected. There's a lot at stake for First Peoples across this country, and our success will not come at the expense. I should say that success won't come at your expense. Voice, treaty, and truth. These are the things that will benefit the very soul of this nation. Everyone will benefit. But anyway, I've got a bit to go through, so I'll get cracking. But I want to start with some words first. 5 words. We are on Aboriginal land. These 5 words typically scare the pants off right-wing shock jocks. But for the rest of us, they merely offer a simple truth. One we should be grateful for. The truth that we're all lucky to walk on Aboriginal land, to make home on country that has been cared for and understood for countless generations of First Peoples, who are the custodians of the oldest living culture on this planet is a special thing that we can all share a connection to. I'm going to talk about why me and the vast majority of Aboriginal people in this country want a yes vote to succeed. But first I want to put on the table what's on offer for you. So put your hand up. This is an interactive session. I heard you respond to Thomas earlier, so I'm just going to make the most of it. So put your hand up if you've ever stood in the bush and paused to breathe in and breathe in the smell of eucalyptus. If you've gazed at seamlessly endless horizons in the desert with wonder. If there's a particular piece of stunning coastline that you're drawn back to where you watch the waves crash into the shore. For me, I love the Cathedral Ranges in our high country, a special place on Tanarang country. So hands up if you've ever done, or if you've done all of those things. Geez, you're a well-travelled mob in this room, I think. So, fantastic. I think that's just about everyone, and if it's not, I'm claiming it anyway. So, but it's ultimately all of us. We absolutely love this beautiful and great country. Who wouldn't? It's spectacular and a good place to live. We came to this place through different paths, whether we were born here or whether you were drawn here. But today and tonight is where we find ourselves, in this moment, with the once-in-a-generation opportunity ahead of us at referendum. So what's on offer? Over 60,000 years of history and culture, wisdom and knowledge, traditions and celebrations, strength and resilience, something we all can celebrate. That's what's on offer for every single Australian. Voice and later, treaty and truth will provide many opportunities for everyone to deepen their understanding and appreciation for our wonderful culture. I believe that sharing in it will only enrich and help it thrive. And I also hope it'll deepen your own sense of connection to place in this country. The voice to Parliament is about having a taste of that inserted into the heart of the Australian democratic system. You lose nothing, but stand to gain so much. We love our culture and want to share it and have it respected and have everyone able to celebrate it. And all we ask in return is for the freedom and power to make decisions that impact our communities, our culture, and our lands. We want just in what was taken from us, the freedom to choose our own paths in life. For too long, Aboriginal people have had policies made to us, for us, but never by us. Every aspect of our lives have been controlled. Where we could live, who we could marry, forced from our ancestral lands, where we've gathered natural wealth and for countless generations, our children stolen and our families torn apart. These were the policies made by politicians who didn't understand us and certainly didn't respect us. This isn't ancient history. This is living memory, and the scars run deep, and the flow-on effects of dispossession are still holding our people back. Having a voice is the first step in having a meaningful say of the decisions that affect our lives, reclaiming our inherent rights as First Peoples. These discussions about voice, treaty and truth aren't about assigning blame or guilt. It's about understanding what caused and perpetuated the problems that are continuing because of it. And most importantly, the conversation is about us all committing to fixing them. While it may not be perfect, the alternative is us waking up to a country post-referendum that told our people and our communities that we don't belong and that our voice should be silent. I'd urge everyone not to let the perfect get in the way of the good. Don't let the search for detail leave us without a seat at the table. A yes vote is confirmation that you want all First Nations communities to thrive again, for our unique connection to this place is recognised, respected and celebrated. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marcus and Thomas, for those incredible contributions. There are seats down the front, and I can see that there's people up the back. Can we just take a couple of minutes? If anyone needs to stretch. And can you peeps, if you would like a seat, please come down the front. There's lots of seats down the front.
What a great turnout, eh?
Yeah, not bad. It's a pretty good electorate, actually.
A little bias.
All right. So we're going to start with some questions. It's going to be nice and interactive. And if anyone's got any questions, it's still not too late to put one up on the scan the QR code, and they come through to the laptop. Marcus, I'm going to give you this one first, but Thomas, you can weigh in if you like. What is your response to the argument of treaty first and the other arguments put forward by people such as Senator Lydia Thorpe?
I mean, my simple answer to that question, as I make sense of it and as the role I've played in the last 3.5 years in leading the treaty journey along with our amazing members of the First Peoples Assembly on both treaty and truth, is that we would not have seen success in Victoria on treaty nor on truth if it wasn't for having the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, which is the elected voice for our communities across this great state. So I just can't understand how we'd be able to progress treaty without having a voice. And I guess one of the risks it poses that you may sign a treaty, but a change of government will just tear it up. And so then what does that mean for the notion of treaty and sovereignty when you have a parliament that just tear it straight up before you have voice?
Yeah, I want to share from a perspective of a person that negotiates agreements as a union official, that a good agreement never comes before you establish a representative body for a large collective of people. It doesn't just go for workers, it goes for any other, it goes for a nation, right? You need a parliament with members that you elect to be able to do things in the world, you know. So I think it's just my response is a matter of logic, you know, that a representative body, you know, just like in Victoria, in a federalised system where there's a federal government that we should be, you know, dealing with as well to understand what their obligations are to treaties in the states and the territory. It is really important, again, to set up a national body. The other thing is that treaty will take decades. The treaty experts say that, Indigenous treaty experts think, you know, 30 to 40 years. I heard Senator Thorpe herself say in a public forum, it's on the internet, you can probably find it, that it'll take at least 2 decades. And that's about right when you think that Victoria is more than a decade on and not even at the point of a lot of claims. That's no one's fault, not the government, not the mob involved. It's just how complex it is, you know, more than 200 years after first contact, and the damage that has been done to our social and political structures. And so if we can agree that it's going to take at least 2 decades, then what are we going to do about the problems now, the common problems in our communities? Housing, the justice system, infrastructure, you know, clean water. You know, we must establish the means to influence those decisions now without waiting for an uncertain outcome. And then finally, I think I'll just reiterate the point that when a treaty is made, that's not the end and everyone sings Kumbaya and it's over, right? If you look anywhere in the world, treaties are an ongoing political and legal struggle. And so again, a national body is going to be really important to supporting, ensuring the outcomes are achieved.
I suppose the other thing about this is the fact that we are a bit behind other countries means that we can benefit from their experience, and we can look at what's happened in similar countries elsewhere. And we know that in Canada, I think it's 12 years now that they've been working on the treaty and have made some progress, but it's limited. And the other thing is that these things are not isolated. That we can have treaty, we can work towards the treaty, and have a voice. So they can work in tandem. We don't have to do it one at a time And as you say, it's not going to make a lot of sense to do that. Peter Dutton. Not someone we see a lot of in Kooyong. He says that there's no details about the voice, although some would argue that substantial details about the proposal are available. Thomas, how are we going to help Kooyong understand the impact and importance of the yes vote? How are we going to do it? These people in this room, if they're all believers, they might not be, but if they're committed to the cause, where do we go from here?
So simple messaging, right? As Marcus explained and Monique, that this is the constitutional change itself is quite simple. It's the principle that we should have a voice. There's a really succinct way that some are saying it's just recognition and consultation. That's all it is that we're doing here. But the way that we're going to do it, I think, listen to young Connor. I know he's been doing Connell's been doing a lot of good work. He's going to talk to you soon about how to get involved, and you're going to have the tools that you need to help people to understand that and overcome Dutton's confusing message about detail.
My assessment so far is that this referendum will be won at the coffee tables, on the door knocks, conversations with your family, conversations with your friends, your colleagues. That's what's going to win this referendum, because the further we go along, the more we'll understand that this is simply set out to achieve, or be one component of achieving, or I should say, it's one mechanism to improve the lives of our people by its ability to reach into every corner of this great country, understand the complexity of issues by those who are affected most, and be able to thread the eye of the needle on that issue to provide that advice to the Parliament and to the government of the day. That's the difference. It'll see a dramatic shift in better policy making, because right now, that's the biggest issue. Generations of countless governments have failed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We've had previous voices, as we heard earlier. When they haven't liked it, they've basically just torn it apart. It wasn't too long ago, and we even hear the arguments from old mate Peter around, it being a voice, shouldn't be a voice to government. But we can't lose sight at the same time that leaders from around this country were meeting at Uluru to talk about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and what we wanted, was the same time that current Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, which was Nigel Scullion, was using the Aboriginal Advancement Strategy funding to fund his fishermen and cattlemen associations to fight native title claims in the Northern Territory. That is some of the things that have been used for money that's targeted to improve the lives of our people. And that's some of the things that need to stop. And a voice can advocate against some things like that, as well as all the outcomes that we hear, or the poor outcomes we hear through the Closing the Gap statistics.
I think this is a really good question. How do we answer voters who are thinking of voting no because of their concerns that not all Indigenous people support it? I'm going to answer that first, and the answer I always give to people is, I have 3 kids, and if I ask them what they want for dinner, I get 3 different answers. I actually think it's naive to think that all of the people of any family, any group, any nation will support any one idea. That's never going to happen. It wouldn't happen here if I asked any one of you a question. We could separate you off into a number of groups. So. And nor should people, all of one group, have the same opinion about anything. And I think it's a bit unusual that people think we should. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, I think a lot of people that say that want to do the right thing by Indigenous people, and so they are concerned when they hear different points of view. So in some ways I understand that. At the same time, to believe that and not do anything is far worse, and it dehumanises us somewhat to expect that we would have homogeneity, be homogenous on a position. as something as important as this. I think everybody should consider the logic, you know. I mean, we just talked about the treaty first argument, you know, and the logic that we've explained now. That's important, you know. Use your own thinking caps in this as well, about why this is the right thing to do.
I guess I'd just ask them to consider the principle that we shouldn't be held to a higher democratic standard than our fellow Australian. We don't expect all Australians to.
I'll just add this as well. The establishment of the Voice in itself gives us the opportunity to have informed, regular debates and consensus building about our interests and priorities. And so it's actually the means to, you know, be, you know, for people to understand what Indigenous people want, instead of, at the moment, you have a lot of debates over social media or, you know, at disjointed rallies and conferences. You have, you know, 5 speakers on the stump at something, you know, at a conference or a rally, and 10 different solutions to one problem. And this lack of coherency really is a problem with our effectiveness in moving forward.
Could you imagine if we applied that standard to our parliament? They couldn't pass laws unless they all agreed. Be a very interesting country, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I like that. Come on. I tell you what, the sitting weeks would be long weeks. Okay, so what about this? If the Voice is enshrined in the Constitution, can't its recommendations just be systematically ignored by the government of the day?
Yes, ultimately yes. It's got an advisory capacity to basically advise government on better policies and the impacts that they'll have in our communities on the ground for our most vulnerable, for those who don't have a voice. So, I mean, it'd be a pretty brave government to turn its back on a voice that was decided on by the people of Australia after our consecutive governments had torn down every other voice that we had, hence why we won constitutional protection. So I'd just imagine it'd be a pretty brave government to do that. But ultimately, it's up to the Parliament to, you know, make those decisions as per parliamentary sovereignty. That's what they're elected to do. But I see the Voice as only a mechanism of making the Parliament and government better and improving the lives of our people.
Yeah, there is the debate at the moment about the executive government being part of it. You know, so it's a voice to the Parliament and the executive government. But it's really important, I think, that we should accept that it should be the norm that they listen to what we have to say, at least demonstrate that they've considered the advice, right? And then, as Marcus said, if they ignore that and there is a detrimental effect, and that's clear, then there should be a political cost as well.
I actually think that the Parliament will, at times, you know, it will not. It'll take the advice. It will listen to it. Hopefully, it will consider it, but it won't act on it. And nor should it. I don't think the Parliament's role is to just slavishly follow every decision or guidance that's given it to by the Voice. But the important thing is that it demonstrates responsiveness, that it does listen, and then perhaps explains why it doesn't. You know, the Parliament will need to provide a response to the Voice's recommendations, and that will hold the Parliament to account. The reality is, when Parliament sits, as you say, you know, on any decision, you know, 2/3 of the people in the House might agree with it, and 1/3 might disagree. There will be things that there will be instances where Parliament doesn't agree with the Voice. I actually think it would be a problem if it didn't. I don't think it should follow every single thing as a matter of course, because the role of Parliament is to look at the evidence and act as responsibly as it can on it, taking into account the best interests and of all Australians. But without that voice being there and that input to Parliament on these really important issues, then Parliament will be making decisions potentially without the best information at hand. And that's why we kind of need it. So, at what stages of the legislative process is it understood that the Voice would have a role to play, and how do we challenge the myth that it represents a veto? I think I can probably answer that one. So the myth that it represents a veto just has to be dispelled. It's false. It's very clear that that won't be the case. In terms of what stages of the legislative process is it understood, that is a matter for discussion, really, I suppose.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Parliament will decide about the powers, functions, composition and functions and processes of the voice. Again, all we're enshrining here, what we are talking about here with this referendum is enshrining the principle that we should have a say.
One thing that often gets lost in this conversation, because, you know, obviously there's a lot of wedge tactics and misinformation, but I'd imagine the Parliament would actively seek advice from the voice on certain issues. Like, that's not been discussed. Everything's about, you know, the voice is going to go do A, B and C, but the Parliament, and I assume the government, will seek advice on key issues, and that's why it's a process of making our functions in our democracy better.
There's a good example actually with the Northern Territory with the sunsetting of the Stronger Futures legislation that came out of the intervention and the lifting of the alcohol bans. If there was a national body, it would have been doing the work with the communities and with the government ahead of time to ensure that there was a transition into something that was genuinely wanted by Indigenous people and would support those communities. It's an example of the voice would be able to get ahead of things and propose policies and reforms.
Some of the rhetoric from the no camp is gross. Thomas just said that's true. How can we support First Nations people during this time as neighbours, friends and fellow Australians?
Yeah, I guess I could speak about some of the stuff we had to deal with during the First Peoples Assembly and the treaty debate, because, I mean, this is going to be kind of that tenfold, but we're already seeing some of the misinformation and the nastiness and, you know, elements of racism coming through that those debates. But ultimately, my biggest worry, having a clinical family therapy background, is how do we look after our community during this debate, because it is going to be heightened. There are significant concerns around some of the information that will go around and how exactly you feel about that. And we had a presentation recently at the Referendum Working Group by the campaigners from the Marriage Equality Yes campaign, and spoke about some of the support you need to put in place. And we'd need to look at you know, culturally informed therapeutic supports to make sure our mob are supported. But also, you know, we live in general neighbourhoods as well. We need support from our neighbours, our allies, to actually make sure that they're standing with us shoulder in shoulder and walking with us step by step on this journey, because it's going to be a rough one. It's going to be a hard one. But the prize is ultimately worth the fight. But we just need to make sure that we're looking after our communities, and the more our allies can actually step up and make sure they're supporting us, I think the better and the smoother this process will be.
With so many different Aboriginal groups across Australia, how do we ensure that the voice is able to represent all groups?
Well, that's the importance of the local, regional and national layers of representation. It's going to be about the resourcing of the representative body as well. I'll answer it this way. One of the things that was raised, and is still raised today, is about why don't we go for 7 reserved Senate seats like our Māori brothers and sisters. And our people in the dialogues and at Uluru lent towards a broader representative structure. Does this mean that every single nation is going to be represented? I don't think that's the way that the model's going to be. It'll be similar to how ATSIC was with, you know, regions. The Langton-Kalma report talks about by state. But look, I think it's important that the resourcing is there and people are able to access the representatives.
And I think I go back to my statement earlier around democratic standards, that the voice will represent the community it serves, and if that community feels as though it's not being represented, it'll be their choice I'm assuming through an elected process, to change their representatives so they actually find someone who does represent them. So, I mean, like any democratic system, that's our people will hold, you know, that vote, or however that process works. Like us at the First Peoples Assembly, if I wasn't representing my nation, they wouldn't vote me in next time. Well, I'm not standing, so they can't anyway, but you know what I mean.
And it's the thing about flexibility of those details as well, right? These things will always need to evolve as you learn, you know, and need to improve.
There's one question. How do we help out the campaign in other pivotal states like WA, with the thought that Kooyong is more likely to be supportive of the voice than other parts of the country, perhaps? How do we support?
I just actually got back from WA. I landed Saturday morning, and it's amazingly positive over there. I shouldn't say I'm surprised, given the success they had in the marriage equality. But it's amazingly positive over there. Like, there's just a really good vibe and good energy, and they believe that they're going to get a strong turnout and have strong success over there. So it was actually really, really amazing being there, listening to the people, listening to the questions, which are very similar to what we're hearing from tonight. But yeah, WA is obviously a battleground, but I walked out of there, and it's only a point in time, but I left there feeling pretty confident about and how WA will turn out.
Yeah, I can share some research with you. So consistently over the probably last 3 years, the numbers have been close to 60% support from the Australian people. But something you might not have heard is that every state and territory has been over 50%. The worst two states were Queensland and WA, but still over 50%. And New South Wales was a concern as well. The support, though, is a soft support, so around 40 of that 60% is a soft support. Only 20 are definite yeses. And so what it tells us, I think, is that the sentiment of the Australian people is for this. They just want to be reassured and understand that it's the right thing to do. So that simple messaging, having discussions with people you trust, that trust you, and that type of thing is really important. The other thing I'll say to that is, I think most of you would have family and friends in other states and territories, so reach out to them. Actually, maybe even write a list of, you know, who you can think of that you could call and have a conversation with, and do a bit of preparation on that, and then give them a call and just say, hey, you know, this is coming up, I think it's really important, and share that with them. And Connell will share other ways to reach out.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. We've just got time for 2 more questions. This one, I think you can start with Marcus. The questions, there's a few people have asked similar sorts of questions actually. What is a treaty, and how's the treaty process gone in Victoria, and how can we use that as a model for the country?
I mean, it's a great question. What is a treaty? I should be able to answer that one, shouldn't I? Well, I'd hope anyway. Ultimately, a treaty can mean a lot of different things. So from the perspective of what we've pursued in Victoria, is that a treaty would be the vehicle for our people, or the tide that raises all ships, that we can improve the lives of our people. It's a process of peace, but it's a process of creating equality. And we see that through agreement making, but we also see that through decision making, putting traditional owners in this state in the driver's seat to be in control of their own destinies. That's ultimately what we've seen treaty as in Victoria. As Thomas said, we haven't put a log of claims on the table yet. We've spent since 2016 building the ecosystem of treaty making, so we have an equal footing when we go to the table to negotiate with government. And that's been through creating a treaty authority, which is the independent umpire. It's been by creating the ground rules through the treaty negotiation framework, and creating an independent source of revenue through the self-determination fund. So actually when we negotiate, treaty here is above politics. It's not partisan. That's why we have bipartisan support in Victoria, and treaty making has become part of the state's furniture. because everyone understands that the outcomes for our people, First Nations people in this state, are just, they're horrific, and we're a progressive state. We have the highest rates of child protection than any other state in this country. And we see that as a treaty as being a vehicle to put our people in the driver's seats to, make decisions on issues that disproportionately impact us, and that's where we've seen it. Now, what treaty will look like? Gladly, that won't be subject to me. That'll be our next First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, because we're about to go to the polls in June and July, and so May and June, and they'll be tasked with negotiating a statewide treaty, and then we'll know what the log of claims are and exactly what the negotiations will entail. But ultimately, our philosophy has always been to improve the lives of our people, and we make better decisions about First Nations people when First Nations people are actually advising or making those decisions. So that's philosophically how we've approached the whole treaty journey here.
Last question, except for one which we're going to come back to in a second. How do we determine who's eligible to vote on who goes into the voice?
Well, yeah, this has been thrown around by the no case a bit lately about, non-Indigenous people jumping on the rolls and suddenly claiming to be Indigenous. For a long time, there's been a what do you call it? The 3-point test of, do you know it off by heart? It's that you identify, that you are accepted by an Indigenous community, and that you, what was the last one? There's a second one. Anyway, continuous connection to country, that's right. So there's already a legal precedent for that, so it's that's not going to be an issue.
And if I use the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria as an example, we have an electoral roll, and because we're such a young population, from 16 upwards can vote in our elections. We'd imagine it'd be the same. And just in response, I've learnt more about the no case tonight than I didn't even really know that they were actually operating, so that's really good to know.
Okay, thank you. Now, the last question that is not really a question, but it is a question, but it's the most popular question left to me, is where did Thomas get his T-shirt?
And does he have any more?
Well, the next time I come to Kooyong, I want everybody on the streets wearing one of these shirts.
No, no, because we have our own.
Well, that's what I was going to get to next. Don't wait for a shirt. Fundraise, get them going, get your shirts. But yes23.com.au is the website. They'll be up for sale there soon. Yeah.
Yes, so, which leads me on to Connell. Connell, would you like to come up and join us? So Connell Fairley is come on, give me a clue. Oh, no, I think, are you going first?
Yeah, get Thomas first.
Actually, just before Connell speaks, just please don't go. You've got something special. Thomas is going to give us the Uluru Statement from the heart.
We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention. Coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That a peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link should disappear from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. That was incredibly moving and very powerful. And how fortunate are we tonight to have guests of this calibre with us. And how fortunate is Kooyong to have a representative who's willing to host events like this. So just once more, because I love hearing it and because they deserve it, can we have a round of applause? I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight as well. Many of you will be supporters of The Voice, and many of you will know that The Voice fundamentally is about giving First Nations communities the opportunity to have a say in the decisions that impact their lives. And when I first heard that, I thought of Monique and what Kooyong did last year, because to me that's really at the core of what Kooyong did in electing Monique. It's at the core of the independence movement, and it's part of why Kooyong is such a special community, such an active democracy. And I mean, it's a Thursday night in a town hall in Hawthorne, and there's 350 people here and however many watching at home as well. So that's a pretty special thing in any corner of the country on any given night. Now, just being here tonight shows that you care about this issue. It shows that you're willing to listen and you're willing to learn, and that's fantastic. But what we know is that caring about this issue is not going to make the Voice of Parliament a reality. We know that Kooyong can move mountains. We saw that last year. And so what I want you to think about tonight, and reflecting on what these amazing speakers have spoken about, is what's stopping Kooyong from moving mountains again, and what's stopping Kooyong from leading the nation in the Voice of Parliament campaign. So I want to walk through a little bit about what it is exactly that we want to achieve, and a little bit about how we're going to get there, and what your role to play in it is as well. So for starters, obviously, we want to enshrine a Voice of Parliament in the Australian Constitution, because First Nations people deserve recognition and consultation. But what we also want to do here in Kooyong is we want to speak to every voter, and Monique has set us a very lofty task of having the highest yes vote of any electorate in the country. Now, we know that that is a lofty goal, but we do think it's an achievable one. And as I said, we've seen Kooyong move mountains before, and there's no reason why Kooyong can't move mountains again. So we'll be doing a range of things to make this happen. We'll be doing digital advertising, we'll be doing more events and street meets and forums like this. We'll be doing letterboxing and putting pieces of mail into people's letterboxes and things like that. But that's all really well and helpful. But what we also know is that the No campaign will be well funded, it will be organised, and it may be able to go toe to toe with us on anything that money can buy. What's so special about Kooyong and what's so special about all of you in this room is that you're something that the No campaign can never buy. And you demonstrated that last year with one very important tool, and that was door knocking. So we want to knock on every single door in the electorate once again for the Yes campaign for the voice, because we want to speak to the neighbours, we want to answer their questions, we want to listen to their concerns, give them information about what the voice is, because we know if people are informed about the voice, then they're much, much more likely to vote yes. And that's the best way that we can counteract the noise that's coming from outside of whatever nefarious actors are spreading them. And it's the one tool that the No campaign will never, ever have. So this is what we need to do to ensure Kooyong has the highest yes vote in the country. Last year, you all changed Kooyong forever. This year we have the opportunity to change the country forever as well. So Marcus made this an interactive event, so I'm going to follow suit with this. And what we really need to get this going, I can't door knock every house in the electorate by myself. I'm not fit enough and don't have the right shoes. But what we need is people to commit right now at this point in history, put their hand up and say, I'm willing to host a door knocking event. So is there anyone, where it can be tomorrow, it can be Saturday, Sunday, next weekend, the weekend after, is anyone here willing to put their hand up and say, yes, I will host a door knocking event? We got some down the back. Okay, give these people a round of applause, by the way. If you're willing to host an event, come stand up the front here, just at the front of the stage. If you're one of those people that just put your hand up. Yes, question?
Do you have to be... Good, that's all right, all good. We haven't actually talked about, just to touch on that, so one of the questions that didn't come up towards the top during the question and answer session was, well, what about other electorates? And I have to say, if we're running a community thing, this is not just about Kooyong. And we know that some electorates have got their own sorts of mobilisation happening, some don't. I can tell you, we know, for example, that Menzies, which is adjacent, the local member for Menzies, Keith Wallahan, is not in favour of the voice. So he won't be mobilising anything in his electorate. And this is not a political thing, but we are going to invade Menzies and, and knock on their doors. Because we feel like we need to do that. So it's a little bit dependent on how much goodwill we have and how many people are going to be knocking on doors, but it's not about Kooyong, it's about the voice. It's a very different thing. And so we're really keen to go wherever we feel people have a question. And what these door knockers will be doing is not proselytising. It's not saying you have to do this. It's knocking on people's door and saying, what do you know about the voice? What questions have you got? And not lecturing to people and not getting into arguments, but spreading an understanding so that people can make their own informed decision to vote yes.
That basically means you're the first person to show up to a door knock. You tell people what to do as they arrive. You say hi to them, tick them off the list, and then you tell them where to meet at the end. You all come back, have a cuppa together and debrief.
Oh, good on you. No, good on you. Where the light?
Okay. Now, these people up the front, you'll see that there are 11 signs on the floor down there. They've got the names of the suburbs that are in Kooyong. I want someone to take some initiative, grab those signs. If you're from the suburb on that sign, then I want you all to group together and stand in different corners of the room. And to everyone else in the room tonight, before you leave, look for the suburb where you live. Go find those people and put your name down and sign up for a door knock. There'll be sheets all around the room. So thank you, everyone.
Hey, Monique, what do you reckon we get?
All right. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Now, I think we're going to
finish up, but just before we finish, we're going to take one last photo, I think, and we're going to take it. Are we doing this, Tam? We're doing? Yes? Oh, yes, Julian. Can we do one last photo of everybody?
Yeah,
Did
I think, Monique, if you come up here and we do it, everybody stands up and...
Oh, good on you. Oh, we're doing it. Oh, I see. We're doing it. Oh, I see. Oh, that's great.
All right. Can everybody stand up? And what we're going to do is we're going to do a selfie with everybody in the background, and I'm going to ask you how you're going to vote, and I think the answer is pretty obvious, yeah? You got it?
Everyone wave their hands around.
How are we voting in the referendum? Are we going to mobilise Kooyong? Yes. Are we going to change the Constitution? Yes.
Thank you all. We'll see you all very soon.